Again, Shavua Tov, and we're here on Daf Samachet Amid Beis. Again, trying to work through this Tosfos Katan. And let's just review the following issue. We said that a Katan, with regard to Shlichus, is a problem for one of two reasons. One is because he's not capable of a minui shliach, and the other is because he doesn't have shlichus at all. Meaning, the nafkamina between these two approaches would be if, let's say, we could circumvent the problem of minui, could we have shlichus for a katan? And we had a case in the Rambam in Hilchos Gerushin, which fits exactly this bill. And the Rambam speaks about a case where he was a pikeach when he appointed the shliach, then he became a shoter after he had appointed the shliach, before the shliach had fulfilled the shlichus. In that case, I mean, you don't have anything parallel exactly in katan. You know, you can't say that he was a gadol, then he became a katan, but you could say he was a pikeach and he became a shoter. And the Rambam says that such a get, if delivered by the shliach, at the moment in which the Baal, the Mishalech, was a shoter, would be kosher midaraisa and posel midrabanan, meaning that the Rambam learns that the whole problem of shlichus in the case of a katan is that he cannot appoint the shliach, but in this case where he appointed the shliach as a pikeach, so then the shlichus operates. And the tour, the Rama was in Perik Beit Hilchos Gerushin Halacha Tesvav. The tour is in Ebenezer Simon Kuf Chav Ches. He says that in this case the get is posel min haTorah, even though he was a pikeach when he appointed the shliach. But obviously, according to the tour, a katan is not just the problem of minei shlichus. Even if you solve that problem, the katan doesn't have shlichus. And the last thing that we left up hanging in the air is, how's the Rambam going to interpret the case of chotzer? The Gemara establishes in Bab Metzia that a katan cannot have chotzer, and the chotzer is not zocha on behalf of the katan because chotzer mitam shlichus and ein shlichus the katan. But here, you don't even need a minui. So everything works out according to the tour, who says that a katan cannot have shlichus, but the Rambam is saying a katan cannot create a shliach, and clearly in the case of chotzer, there's no need for anybody to create the shlichus, and therefore the chotzer should be operative and valid to be zocham on behalf of the katan. That was the last thing that we discussed. Okay. Now we have the, shall we call it, the breakthrough Shitas HaTosfos, that a katan could be zocher, both according to Rav Asi and even according to Rav Chisda's Lesman de Polig, he could be zocher through Daas, Acheres, Makneh. And whoever it is that's being zocha on behalf of the katan, he supplies the das makneh, and in such case we don't need a das kona. So even though the katan is a lav bar das, he can be kona through das acheres makneh. We ask the question, where's the source in the Torah for das acheres makneh, or in Shas? Where did Tosfos get this from? Well, what is the paradigmic case of Das Acheres Makneh? And here we have a sugya, again in Bab Metzia, of what's called a chotzer she'eira mishtameres. The Gemara establishes that a chotzer could only be koneh if it's omed al yad sadeu. If the person who owns the chotzer is present when the zchiyah took place, and he's standing next to his chotzer. But a chotzer she'eina mishtameres, the Gemara says, is not kona. However, Gemara says that if there's Daas, Acheres, Makneh, then the chotzer she'eina mishtameres is kona. And it was a whole story about Tanoim on the boat, and they wanted to be mizakeh the maestros of Rabbi Gamliel to the various Tanoim who were on the boat, and he was makneh them schirus in his field where the the meiser and was located. But the question is, those Tanoim who now have acquired ownership in Rabbi Gamliel's Chatzer, but nevertheless, they're not Omei B'tzad Sadeu, they're all the way out there on the boat. So how can they make Kona, the Peros and the Tvua? How does that work? And here's where the Gemara introduces the concept of Daas Acheres Makneh. So this seems to be the source for Daas Acheres Makneh in the case of a katan who could be Zochin Mamon through Daas Acheres Makneh. So we pointed out that there's a very strange kind of analogy here in Tosfos between Daas Acheres Makneh in the case of a chotzer she'eina mishtameres, and Daas Acheres Makneh in the case of a katan. Because in the case of the Gemara there, with Rabbi Gamliel and the Maestros, there the Daas Acheres Makneh converts the Chotzer into a Chotzer Mishtameres. And that's what Rabbeinu Peretz there, but Metzia on Daf Yud Aleph is quoted as saying that even though a Chotzer she'eina mishtameres is, so to speak, open, and it cannot in any way grab on to the object on behalf of the Baal HaChotzer, because the Baal HaChotzer is nowhere to be found. But in the case of Daas Acheres Makneh, the Makneh is going to provide the shmira, so to speak, and make the Chotzer into Chotzer HaTofeses, which means it now becomes basically a Chotzer Mishtameres. And the question arises, how can we derive from that Daas Acheres Makneh, making the Chotzer she'eina mishtameres into a Chotzer Mishtameres, conclusions about a Chotzer, about a Zechiyah for a Katan? In the case of a Zechiyah for a Katan, we're not dealing with creating a Chotzer Mishtameres, obviously. So how do you know that Daas Acheres Makneh would be operative? However, leaving Rabbeinu Peretz on the side for a moment, we could offer perhaps another suggestion that the problem of Chotzer she'eina mishtameres is not in the Ma'aseh Kinyan, and even a Chotzer she'eina mishtameres is capable of a tfisa on behalf of the Baal HaChotzer, but the chisaron here is Das Kinyan. In Chotzer she'eina mishtameres, there's no Das Konen. And if that be the case, then Daas Acheres Makneh is a whole new ballgame. It substitutes for the Das Konen. And that's exactly what we want to do in the case of Zochim L'Katan. We want to have a Daas Acheres Makneh that will substitute for the absence of a Das Konen, because the Katan is a Labar Das. How can he make his Zechiyah and a Kinyan? But the answer is that Daas Acheres Makneh supplies the Das Makneh and substitutes and alleviates the need and the requirement of Das Konen. If that's what happens in a Chotzer she'eina mishtameres, that the Daas Acheres Makneh adds the element of Das Konen to the equation, even though he's Eino Omei B'tzad Sadeu, then by analogy, Daas Acheres Makneh to be Makneh for a Katan, that again means that the Das Makneh substitutes for the lack of a Das Konen, like in the case of Eino Ome B'tzad Sadeu in a chotzer. And the cotton can now be zocha, even in the absence of das kona, because das cheres makneh supplies the das kona as well. Okay. All right. Now we move ahead to another issue in this Tosfos. And that is the Shita of Asi in Gittin, that a katan is not only zochali atzmo, but he's also zochal acheres. Again, Rav Chisda rejects it, but according to Rav Asi, he could be zocher lacheres. So in a case where he's zochali atzmo, which according to Tosfos kuliyamalo pligi, everybody agrees that he can be zocher midaraisa liatzmo, even though he's a katan, because the das acheres makneh. Now that I understand, because then the das makneh fills in for that piece of the puzzle that we're missing. The katan does the ma'aseh kinyan for himself. The makneh supplies the das makneh and the das kona. But in the case of a katan being zochel acheres, the katan is doing the ma'aseh kinyan on behalf of someone else. So with all due respect to das acheres makneh, where's the ma'aseh kinyan here? It's the katan. The katan cannot be a shliach on behalf of the gadol. So how could the ma'aseh zechia of the katan operate effectively and be valid on behalf of the person who, for whom he's being zocha? So the katan is a mezakeh. I understand that you've solved the das problem, but how do you solve the ma'aseh kinyan problem? The ma'aseh kinyan of a katan is not operative and not valid on behalf of gadol, because the katan cannot be appointed as a shliach for the gadol. And that, by the way, has nothing to do with the machlokas, the Ram and the Torah that we discussed. That machlokas is about whether or not a katan himself might be able to be zocher. If, let's say, we could obviate the problem of mini shlichus. So the gadol is the shliach on behalf of the katan. But now we have a case of a katan being zocher acheres, where the katan is now the shliach on behalf of the gadol. How could that be? And l'chorah, the only way of solving this problem is to be machalik between zchia and shlichus. That zchia somehow operates without shlichus, and the katan could be zocher on behalf of someone else, but not midin shlichus. He cannot be a shliach for the zocher, for the gadol, because he's a labar shlichus. But now we're talking about zocher li'anam. But Tosfos insists that Schia mitam shlichus. So Schia mitam shlichus, how could the Katan be Zochel Acherim and serve as a shliach to be Zochel on behalf of someone else when he's a la bar hachi of shlichus? It doesn't seem to make any sense that Daas Acheres Makneh would make the Katan into a bar shlichus such that he could be a valid shliach representing the Zochel. So we're going to have to l'chorah say that although Zchiyas mitam shlichus, as Tosfos points out, that's general Zchiyah. But there's another halach of Zchiyah, of Zchiyah lav mitam shlichus. And the Mazaker, in this case the Katan who's being Zochal b'yad Acherim, is doing the whole thing, meaning he's independent of the so-called Mishaleh, meaning the one who's being Zochal. We don't need that his action should be a substitute or an agent on behalf of the Zochal. We don't need to set up the Katan as a shliach on behalf of the Zochah, because we're dealing with a whole new parsha, a whole new mechanism called Zochah B'Yodam Shalom B'Fanav. Now, at what point do we finally say that a new mechanism, a new halacha of Zechiyah emerges, and it's no longer mitam shlichus? And the only answer that we could give is Daas Acheres Makneh. Now, how does Daas Acheres Makneh impact and transform the Zechiyah from a Zechiyah mitam shlichus to a Zechiyah bifnei atzmo, without shlichus? How does that operate? So the answer is that we have to ask the following question, right? Let's call it, give me a good name for a Katan. We'll call him, just call him the Katan, that's all. So we have Ruvain the Gadol, we have Shimon the Gadol, and we have the Katan. Ruvain gives the object over to the Katan on behalf of Shimon. Ruvain supplies the Daas Acheres Makneh. And we're asking, does the Katan now have to serve as the shliach on behalf of Shimon, who's being Zochah? And the answer is the following. Do we need Shimon's Das as a Das Koneh? If we need Shimon's Das as a Das Koneh, then for sure we need a shliach to effectuate the action on behalf of the Das Koneh, on behalf of the Koneh. The shliach is going to represent the Koneh as an agent doing the Maisa that's going to be Chal, the Maisa Kinyan, on behalf of the Zochah through the mechanism of shliach. But that's only because we need the Das of the Koneh. If he has Das over this Kinyan, then he's the Balabas, and he appoints a Shliach to operate, to implement the Maisa Kinyan, and he's Zocha with his Das in the Chalos Kinyan. But you can't say the same thing in the case of Daas Acheres Makneh, because in Daas Acheres Makneh, we don't need the Das Koneh. The Daas Acheres Makneh will substitute for the Das Koneh. So the Das Koneh is not in the driver's seat. He's not really creating this Kinyan. He's creating the Kinyan when you need Das Koneh. But in the case of Daas Acheres Makneh, we're saying that the Daas Acheres Makneh substitutes for the Das Koneh, so we don't need a Das Koneh. Therefore, this zocher, who's being zocher without das kona, is obviously being zocher through a new principle called zocher l'yodam shel b'fanav. It's not possible that he, the zocher, is appointing a shliach, because he's not in any way effectuating this kinyan. He has no active part in this kinyan. He doesn't have das, and there's no das kona over here on the part of the kona. So how does zocher l'yodam shel b'fanav work? You could say that zocher l'yodam shel b'fanav means that the zocher, we call him Shimon, on behalf of whom we're doing this kinyan, is effectuating the kinyan and sets up the mezakeh as his shliach, and then that's called zchiyah mitam shlichus. But you can't say zchiyah mitam shlichus in the case of Daas Acheres Makneh, where the zocher himself, we call him Shimon, is not operating with Das. It's the Das of Ruvain, the Makneh, that sets up this kinyan. So if you're not operating with the Das of a Kona, then you must be operating with a new principle called Zocher l'yodam shel b'fanav. And that principle is going to operate even in the case where the Katan is being Zocher on behalf of the Gadol, because he's not a Shliach. It's only Zocher l'yodam shel b'fanav. Now, this is all based on a breakthrough of Reb Chaim in Hilchos Yibum. I think we mentioned it in the past, but let's just go over it. Reb Chaim sheds a light on a very basic principle in the Gemara in Ksubas Daf Ayin Dal. The Gemara says, "Kol she'ena b'shlichus, eina b'tnai." And Reb Chaim explains what's the relationship here between shlichus and t'nai. Reb Chaim says that if you want to be able to make a t'nai, you have to have bailus. And if you can't appoint a shliach for this action, then it means you're not the bailim on the action. And therefore you can't add a t'nai into the Maaseh. And this was Reb Chaim's famous proof from Chalitza. That's why the Reb Chaim is published in the fourth parak of Hilchas Chalitza. Reb Chaim says in Chalitza there's no Tanai. And the Gemara establishes why is there no Tanai in Chalitza. This is the Gemara in Ksubas Ayin Daled, because there's no Shlichus in Chalitza. So Tosfos tries to explain what is this logical interdependence between Shlichus and Tanai. Tosfos in Ksubas says that Hainu Taima, the Hoil Ba'amaisa Kolkach B'yoda Sheyachol L'kaim Al Yidei Shliach, if you have so much control over the Maisa that you can even appoint a Shliach to represent you, Svarahu, then it makes sense, She'ek Mochem B'yoda L'Shariya B'Tanai. So Reb Chaim tries to embellish it. Again, if it's B'yodo to set up a shliach, then it's biyodo to set up a tanai. Says Reb Chaim. Oh, and chalitza. Chalitza, there's no shlichus in chalitza. The Yovam can't send anybody else, and therefore he doesn't really have bailus. And if he doesn't have a shliach, he can't set up a tanai. So Reb Chaim explains that what Tosfos has in mind is that when there's a chalos bailus, again, we always have to define, is this bailus? Then we have shlichus and tanai. Only the bailus on the Maisa gives him, the Bala Maisa, the authority or the power to appoint a shliach or to create a tanai in the Maisa. In the case of Chalitza, he's not the bailim over Chalitza, of the Maisa Chalitza. Because the Gemara establishes in Yevamos Daf Kufav that afilu Chalitza mutes, even if they fool him and he does the Chalitza, So he has no das at all, and yet the chalitza is chalitza kshera. So obviously he's not the bailam on the Maisa chalitza. He cannot appoint the shliach to do the chalitza in his place, or can he make a t'nai in that chalitza? Now Tosafos says that in the case of a katan who is choletz, or for example, a Acheres who is choletz, the psul is because la bar kriya. I mean, why didn't the Gemara just say the psul is that he's an Eder ben Daas? Apparently, in chalitza, you're not the bailam. The chalos is taken care of by Hashem, memela, and you just have to do the ma'isa chalitza. You don't even need 80 kiyu. So, based on this Reb Chaim, perhaps we could understand what does it mean zchia lav mitam shlichus. When is das bailam? And the bailam are creating the chalos, so then we need shlichus, and therefore zochel yodel shlo b'fanav has to be mitam shlichus. But if we come up with a case like das Acheres Makneh, where there's no need for das bailam to create the chalos, then all you need is zechia, but lav mitam shlichus. Zechia is a separate entity unto itself. Because again, in such a case where there's no requirement of das bailam, he can't create a shliach. You have to be the bailam to create a shliach. But here, in the case of the shlo b'fanav, he doesn't have das bailam. So then Zechia cannot possibly be mitam shlichus, because how could he appoint the shliach when there's no das bailam? Like chalitza. So whenever the kinyan is chal midin das Acheres Makneh, then who is the bailam over here to create the kinyan? It's not going to be the zocher himself, because he doesn't have any awareness of this kinyan. So forget about cotton for a minute. Just a classic case of two gedolim, right? Reuven is going to be zocher for Shimon. Shimon is no longer considered a bailam over this chalos kinyan because we don't need his das. So we're going to have to assume that it's a milsa the less of a shlichus because there's no das. It's only when the zocher is zocher mitam das, he's applying the das kona, then he's considered the bailam over the chalos, and he can appoint the shliach. So that's called zchia mitam shlichus. Now we get to a case of das Acheres Makneh, which means that the das of the Makneh is all we need, and we don't need the das of the kona. So the zocher or the kona cannot appoint the shliach in this case. So if he can't appoint the shliach, how does zocher be able to work for him? And the answer has to be that if you don't need his das to generate the chalos kinyan, he's not a bailam on the kinyan, then das Acheres Makneh is going to make it like there was a das kinyan. Like das Acheres Makneh is like a substitute for das kinyan. So there's no shlichus over here. Because again, if the das Acheres Makneh is effectuating the kinyan, then we don't need the das of the zocher. And if we don't need the das of the zocher, then he's not a bailam over this kinyan. And memela shlichus could not possibly be chal. So how does zchia work? It must be zchia shalom mitam shlichus. So Ravasi holds that a cotton could be zochel acherim in the case of das Acheres Makneh, because we don't need the das of the Kohen to generate the kinyan. We have a das Makneh. And now we set up a separate din of Zechia unto itself. So the cotton could be Zochel Acheres in a case where there's Das Acheres Makneh. Let's say, for example, a cotton would want to be Zochen Hefker on behalf of someone else. So there's no Das Acheres Makneh. For sure, he couldn't do so, because then we would say Zechia Mitam Shlichus that a cotton is a Labar Shlichus. Oh.
Rabbi Bruce,
Yes.
I was learning a Mishnah in Baba Basra. I think the fifth.
Ruben, you're gonna have to scream a little bit.
Yeah. And, I was learning a Mishnah in Baba Basra, the fifth parak, where the father sends Katan to get oil with a jug, and he and he gets it, and the jug, and it breaks, and the henvini is chayiv. So I was wondering, why isn't it a case of why wouldn't we have, in this case, also a case where the katan Makneh here from the father.
Again, the father sent his, let's say, his son, a katan, to pick up the oil, and it broke.
And what happens is the henvin is chayiv on breaking the
who's chayiv?
The henvini is
the
chayiv. Right.
The henvini is like the middleman who's pouring the oil.
Right.
Did he drop the jug on the floor?
Well, I think the katan did.
The katan who was measuring out the oil on behalf of his father, who's the Kohen.
Right, and apparently, if I understood the Mishnah correctly, it's because the henvini didn't have the permission to send the oil back with the katan in that jug.
In other words, the henvini was considered a poshea. I guess the Gemara is saying that other wood liolam, and in this case, you can't blame the katan. You could blame the henvini for giving it over to the katan. The only thing that bothers my mind is, but the father sent the katan, so maybe in that sense, he gave reshus, he gave license to the henvini to transfer the oil over to the katan. So maybe that would alleviate the henvini of any responsibility of any pshia. That's what I don't.
It's not a case of das Makneh in this.
I have a feeling that in that case, until the child brings the oil back to his father, the kinyan has not been clinched.
Right.
Now you could always ask me, well, according to Ravasi, that cut and zochel acherim, why can't, and das acheres makneh, why can't the das acheres of the henvini generate a din of kinyan such that now when the katan takes the oil on behalf of his father, that kinyan is already clinched. So forget about whether the henvini is responsible or not responsible. It's irrelevant because now the shemen belongs, the shemen and the vessel and so forth belongs to the ab, to the father. That's a very good question. Again, I'm not holding in that sugya.
Okay.
All right. Now, how does Tosfos know that a cotton zochel achirim is doraisa? And Tosfos quotes the brisa of Hodeh Masechet lachirim. So the cotton can do the pigeon on Masechet on behalf of the gadol. So you see that katan zochel acherim for gadol is doraisa. But the problem is that in Masechet there's no das acheres makneh. I mean, the Masechet belongs to, let's call it Mammon Gavoa. But no one is being makneh it to the owner of the field. So what are we going to say over here? Das acheres makneh. I mean, how does a cotton serve as the representative of the Baal Acheres to effectuate a pigeon when Cotton Zochel Acherim is only within Das Acheres Makneh? Here there's no Das Acheres Makneh. So let's read the language of Tosfos. Tosfos says, "V'im tomer v'heich medagdek begit in this Zochel Acherim." The Gemara in Gita wants to prove that a kota could be Zochel Acherim mida poda Masechet lacherim. Afilu halo afilu liatzmo lo zochim ederaisa. Kishe'ein das acheres makno osan. Forget about the katan serving as the representative of a gadol for pigeon meiser. Let's say it was the katan's own meiser. How could he be pod his meiser and be zochel liatzmo without das acheres makna? We said the whole enterprise of a cotton zochel liatzmo is through das acheres makna. And here in Chil Masechet there's no das acheres. The Yeshloma de Kosora Maksha to Kamosha zochel liatzmo bechil meiser min Torah machmas the muflas samach liishto rice is kmochein zochel acher min Torah. Now, I want to point out that this kasha in Teretz Tosfos appears in a more, shall I say, lengthy presentation in another Tosfos, and maybe it's a little bit clearer in that Tosfos. So I'll read to you the lashon of Tosfos in Gittin on Daf Ayin, excuse me. V'im tomar hech podel acherim, ha'afilu l'man di'amar zochel acherim. Even if you accept Rabbi Yassi, hainu v'kisha das acheres makno som acherim. So the cotton is the middleman, and Ruvain through the cotton is being zoch on behalf of Shimon. But that's das acheres makno. But p'tias maser is ain't das acheres makno. he says, "V'havi kmo metzia." That's what he adds here in Gittin, which we don't have here in Sanhedrin. He compares this Zechi of Katan to a case of a metzia. And if somebody wanted to be Zocher a metzia on behalf of the Katan, he can't do so. No. I'm sorry. Scratch that. What I meant to say is that if a Katan wants to pick up Hefker and be Zocher Hefker, everybody agrees that it's not going to be valid on a Doraisa level. Forget about Darki Sholom, because there's no Daas Acheres Makneh. Here also in Pidyon Masechet, there's no Daas Acheres Makneh. Yeshlomar, Kevan de Mufla Hasamach Leish Doraisa, Utrumaso Truma, V'chilulo Chilul. So we have a separate halacha of Mufla Samach Leish, which operates in Nedarim, operates in Truma. The Tosfos says, listen carefully, the language is very difficult. He says, im below, he says, in Kain in Chilul Maser, Yeshlo Lahoil, it should be effective. I feel below Daas Acheres Makneh. Why? Because in the case of Mufla Samach Leish, the Torah would recognize his chilul and validate it. So if with regard to Momenos, he could be Zochel Acherim in Torah, Kisha Daas Acheres Makneh, then as far as chilul Maisa is concerned, that should be operative, even without Daas Acheres Makneh. So this is the Shita Ravasi. The Ravasi holds that the Katan could be Zochel Acherim. I don't get it. What does Tosfos mean over here? That since let me go over it one more time and then I'll let you go. I don't want to keep you here because I got stuck on it. So we have a case of Mufla Samach Leish. He could be Mechalel, and he's considered like a Godel. Therefore, says Tosfos, even in the absence of Daas Acheres Makneh, he could be Mechalel on behalf of the Godel. One more time. Im kain le'inyan chilul masa yesh lo lahoil afilu below Daas Acheres Makneh. I mean, it sounds like he's working with some sort of migu that, like the Gemara says, migu the zokin nafshe, zokin nafshe, that since he can effectuate a chilul maser, a pidyon maser, on his own, again, if he's a mufla samach leish, then so too, he can effectuate a chilul maser on behalf of a gadol. All right, Rabbi. So I'm going to have to try to work this out, and I'll get back to you tomorrow. This is where I got stuck. So if you can make a note of it, that the Tosfos here is expanded upon in Tosfos Gittin Daf Ayin, and we got stuck halfway through this talk. Okay, then? So let me just wish you a great day, and Mirz Hashem will be smarter tomorrow, I hope.